The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
Okay, let's go.
Mix up the intro a little bit. It's the holidays, so we're going to go with that intro for the next, I don't know, maybe through Christmas, something like that. Anyway, Tuesday, December 19th. I hope everybody is well. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's episode talking about intermittent fasting. I did get a lot of people give me feedback that they've tried intermittent fasting and, there were varied results. So I'm going to wait a little bit. I'm going to give that episode a few more days to get people caught up and hopefully get some more feedback. And then I'll share all that feedback in a subsequent episode. And then we'll dive into that intermittent fasting more. The one thing I did want to just, say on that is, I really do believe that every person's body reacts differently to certain things. Certain people, might get a huge benefit from intermittent fasting. So please do not get discouraged. I personally did not get results from it, but maybe my metabolism, doesn't react well that day. The most important thing, and I talked about it yesterday, but I'm just going to reiterate it before we jump into some more stuff, is you've got to get something that's sustainable to you. If you start doing intermittent fasting, whichever time frame you choose, and it's working for you, you like it, you're losing weight, you're feeling better, whatever the case may be, and if you can sustain that, absolutely do it 100%. The thing I find is a lot of people when they do these different types of weight loss. And I'll tell you, the biggest one was back in the day with fresh vegetable juicing. People would do these juice cleanses. I'm talking 2013, 2014, maybe 2015 a little bit. But people would ask me and they'd say, hey, I want to do a 7-day juice cleanse. What do you recommend? Or a 3-day juice cleanse. What do you recommend? And I would tell them I don't recommend any of them because first of all, yes, you will probably lose some weight doing it, but it's not sustainable. You're going to gain that weight right back. A lot of times people end up gaining more weight because after doing, let's say, even a 24-hour juice cleanse or a 3-day juice cleanse, you gorge yourself and you end up eating more, over the next week and gaining the weight you lost back and then some. But then the most important thing is, again, it wasn't sustainable, and it turned people off of fresh vegetable juicing. I had a lot of friends that literally after doing a juice cleanse, they never juiced again. And at that time, my whole goal regarding fresh vegetable juicing was to get people to become everyday juicers. So anyway, that's all on the intermittent fasting thing. All right, let's jump into some things.
Is there still a chance for a two-state solution?
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. And in order to build a new one...
Does that new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? Is that what it includes?
I think the biggest question is what type of Palestinians are on the other side. This is what Israel realized on the 7th of October.
That's the Israeli ambassador to the UK on Sky News. And all right, so I want to start off a little bit talking about this two-state solution. This has been something I've mentioned previously. And, at the end of the day, this is something that should be on the table for everybody if you put diplomacy first and if you put really human rights first and if you put the concept of, okay, let's do what's right for everybody and all people are equal. A two-state solution, there's plenty of land, there's plenty of resources. Even if you end up not doing it or doing it, I don't know, however you want to carve it up, it's absolutely something that should be discussed. But the Netanyahu government doesn't want that. There's zero desire for that.
The answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why.
Well, then how can there be peace? How can there be peace in
the reason there is no peace
Israel
is because the Palestinians...
without offering a state to Palestine, how can there be peace in Israel?
Israel knows today, and the world should know now.
She's adamant. And honestly, she gets agitated in this video. And, to me, it comes off the wrong way. You really, when you get defensive, there's something behind that.
The reason the Oslo Accords failed is because the Palestinians never wanted to have a state next to Israel. They want to have a state from the river to the sea.
So the two-state solution is dead.
Why are you obsessed with a formula that never worked, that created these radical people in the other side? Why are you obsessed with that?
There's so much to that. And, again, obviously you can take the other side or take her side of it and say that, it's never worked. But, I will tell you the research that I've done and all the things we've talked about. I mean, going back to the 2005 situation, the withdrawal from Gaza, the quote unquote withdrawal from Gaza, when in reality, you're talking about only 8,500 Israeli families that were removed from Gaza, and then close to 1.5 to 2 million people that remained. And then that process of the open air prison system kind of came into play, where Israel was controlling everything that went in and out of Gaza, including food, water, electricity, and all that. I would definitely argue that I don't think a two-state solution ever has really been tried. I mean, it's definitely never been tried, but ever really been even on the table when it comes to, a possible resolution in terms of what's going on, in that area.
When talking about this most conservative government in Israel's history, as he called it, he said that they don't want to see anything remotely approaching a two-state solution. Instead, Wolf, he says that ministers within the Netanyahu government want to see retribution against all Palestinians. So, of course, that is very, very strong language. The U.S. has repeatedly, throughout this war, continued to push for a two-state solution. But, Wolf, we should note that there's no indication that that is something that Netanyahu himself is interested in.
So I wanted to play that back half of that CNN clip, which I did play last week as part of, I forget which episode. I think it was 72 or 73. And, the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the UK on the Sky News clip reinforced that. And there's going to be some other things that we're going to play to reinforce that. But, you have to think to yourself, okay, why would you not want a two-state solution? So, aside from all the rhetoric, here's one thing, and I wanted to bring this back onto the table. And it actually kind of is a little bit both sides. So let me explain. Every year, the United States, as Bernie Sanders said in several clips, and as many people have talked about, Israel gets $3 billion of aid from the United States every year for defense, right? For protection, basically. And so you have to be protected from something. There's got to be something to be protected from, or else, whether it's the Democratic side of the Congress or the American people themselves, they'd be like, hey, why are we giving $3 billion to Israel to protect themselves when there's really no one to protect themselves from? So there needs to be somebody to protect themselves from. And so when you look at the Palestinian situation, it's one of two things. It's either Hamas in Gaza, or it's the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Okay? If you've been listening and if you've been paying attention, I think you know the answer to that. Hamas is the big bad wolf. They're the boogeyman. They're the enemy. And again, I'm not saying they're not. I'm really not. Like, honestly, I still, to be totally honest, I can't figure that stuff out. I think there's a level of, I don't know, shadiness to all that. But at the same time, I will tell you this, and I haven't mentioned this yet, but I've been connected with a couple Palestinian activists lately, and I've had several conversations with them, and I ask them really hard questions. I haven't pulled it all together to bring into an episode yet, but I ask them really, really pointed and difficult questions, and they definitely side more on Hamas, not being any funny business. But I don't know. I'm not there yet. Like could they be in on this whole thing? Obviously, I've shared my thoughts on the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas, and the feeling that the Palestinian Authority is not all on the up and up. Are they a puppet of the U.S. and Israel, are they someone that, even if they're not a puppet, and let's say they're loyal Palestinians, but are they loyal in the sense that they're also willing to play ball when it comes to things? They're willing to basically go along with the plan in order to create some type of semblance of peace, and then at the same time, they are reaping the rewards of that. Do not put it past a small group of politicians to try and reap the rewards of the continued suffering of their people. I definitely don't put it past any politician, and I'm not, or group of politicians, and I'm not just talking about the Palestinian Authority there. That actually could apply to a lot of different countries, which I'm not going to mention right now. But anyway, the fact that there needs to be a boogeyman and there needs to be an enemy, just don't, I guess, sell that concept short, because you need that in order to get funding, And then by the same token, the Palestinian Authority also, over the years, if there's anyone that's received aid and support from Western countries and the United States, it's been the Palestinian Authority, and it's gone into the West Bank. It has not gone into Gaza.
Joining me now is Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Regev, thank you very much indeed for joining us again. Just start, first of all, if we could, with Israel's ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, coming out very strongly in this interview with Sky, in which she said there's no prospect of any two-state solution, and that's gone around the world. Do you agree with that? I mean, is that it? That's done, and is that Israel's position now?
Well, we're obviously not close to peace at the moment. We're fighting a war against Hamas, and we're focused on winning that war. But in a long-term arrangement, we have a formula that is simple, and it works, I believe. And that formula is as follows. The Palestinians should have all the rights, all the capabilities to govern themselves, and they shouldn't have the powers that can hurt or threaten Israel. I think that's a sensible formula.
So they shouldn't have their own state?
Well, it depends how you define the term state. I'll give you a
Or should they have the same rights as Israel, for example?
Oh my gosh, politics, wordsmithing. All right, that's Piers Morgan. That's the gentleman, Mark Regev. I've played him several times. He has now really emerged as, besides Netanyahu, he's pretty much the main spokesperson when it comes to interviews that are being done. And actually, I'll tell you something interesting. So when this thing started October 7th, the main guy they put forward was that Naftali Bennett, who was the former prime minister of Israel. But that guy's even more right-wing than Netanyahu. He's like so far right, he's circling himself, basically. But he had so many ridiculous, unhinged clips. He reminds me of Ben Shapiro, who's totally unhinged. But he had so many crazy, unhinged clips that went viral, and really he just got clowned over and over again. And it's not even about getting clowned. It was like he just was not representing Israel in a way that was helping their cause. That dude is gone. You do not see him on anything. And there were a couple other guys that were kind of front and center. A couple guys, again, former prime ministers and former high up people. They are all pretty much out of the public spotlight. I find that very interesting, and it's something I've noticed. But Mark Regev, he's a sharp guy, and he definitely is a very calm person, so his emotions don't get the best of him. So even if you don't like what he's saying, he delivers it in a very mild-mannered tone. And again, if you are a supporter of Israel and a supporter of that side, he's definitely serving the side well, similar as how I talked about Netanyahu doing that. But this is the fundamental question, at the end of the day, do you agree that the Palestinian people and the Palestinians should have the same exact rights as Israelis or as Americans or as Canadians or as French? You know, at the end of the day, are people people?
I'll ask you the following question, Piers. Should the Palestinians, should they be able to have an army, an air force? Should they have all those military powers that could theoretically threaten the state of Israel? And the answer, in our view, is clearly no.
If you've been following Piers Morgan at all with his Uncensored program, I've talked about it a couple times. You know, he's actually under a lot of heat from the Palestinian side, basically saying he doesn't treat the Palestinian Muslim guests fairly. And, you know, to be honest with you, I mean, I see a little bit of that, but I have to give the guy credit. And this is one thing I fault these Palestinian activists about. You know, I mean, listen to this interview. This is Mark Regev, senior advisor to Netanyahu. You know, again, could Pierce push him harder? Absolutely. But these are good questions. These are really good questions. I'd rather have Mark Regev answering these questions than no questions.
Why should they be prohibited from having, my question would be, why should they be prohibited from having exactly the same rights as a state to Israel? Wouldn't that be ultimately the way you actually achieve peace? Not allowing the Palestinians to have the same rights as Israelis has just not worked, has it? I mean, demonstrably not worked.
On the contrary, if this is going to work, it has to be based on realism. We can't base peace on assumptions that just aren't founded on reality.
All right, Mr. Regev is probably was on his debate team in high school because he's smooth, but this part just doesn't make much sense.
And Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister of Israel, who wanted to make peace with the Palestinians, who was the prime minister at the time of the signing of the Oslo Accords, he gave a speech, and he was very clear. He said that the Palestinians will have less than a state. Yitzhak Rabin said, the man who was shot for his efforts to move forward on the peace process.
Okay, really quick. He's talking about former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. That's how I've learned to pronounce it. And that guy was really trying to broker a two-state solution, and so was Yasser Arafat. The two of them were trying to broker a two-state solution, and they both were assassinated. So think about that.
Both sides, to make a deal, have to want to make it. First thing you have to ask, do they both want to make it? I have a real question as to whether or not both sides wants to make it. I have a real question as to one side in particular, whether or not they want to make it. I think one side actually would like a deal, and I think the other one maybe doesn't want a deal. But a lot will have to do with Israel.
All right, so I did find some stuff about Trump recently talking about this situation. And, you know, like I actually kind of assumed, I definitely think there's been a falling out with him and Netanyahu, whether that was Netanyahu basically, you know, congratulating Biden on his election win, which I don't blame him for doing that. I mean, I think if that's why Trump is pissed at him, that's kind of childish. But there's definitely been a fallout, and they definitely are not boys the way I thought they were boys, as I talked about in episode, I believe, 36, which focused on the relationship between Israel and the Republicans, which, by the way, I now am totally clear on, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent episode.
And whether or not Israel wants to make the deal.
I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? And it was almost like a father. I mean, you know, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, "You don't want to make a deal, do you?" And he said, "Well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal."
Why?
I thought the Palestinians were impossible, that the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true.
All right, so that was an interesting interview. I mean, basically the gist of it from Trump was that he went into it thinking the Palestinians are going to be impossible, they're going to be difficult. Now, again, he's dealing with Mahmoud Abbas, so that was the Palestinian Authority side of things, so not Hamas and Gaza again. But, you know, that's interesting that he pretty much is like, oh, it ended up being the exact opposite. Bibi basically did not want a deal. I could tell he didn't want a deal from the beginning. And, like I said, it definitely speaks to, that fallout that I believe has taken place.
A two-state solution is the only way to guarantee the long-term security of both Israelis and Palestinian people. To make sure Israel and Palestinians alike live in equal measure of freedom and dignity. We'll not give up on working toward that goal, two-state solution.
So that was Biden over the weekend. There's definitely a lot more talk about it. But at the same time, like we talked last week, then the United States votes against the ceasefire, So, obviously people will be like, well, we have to eradicate Hamas first before a ceasefire, or that'll give them a chance to, rebuild. But I don't know, man. Game of Thrones, that talk from Biden about a two-state solution and all of this, like I said, to me, I feel like the ulterior motive that is being formed, or the ulterior storyline that is being formed, is how do we get rid of Netanyahu out of this? How do we get rid of that far-right government that Israel has as really part of this, let's say, potentially opportunity that has arisen, and let's pivot?
The United States continues to believe that the best viable path, indeed the only path, is through a two-state solution. That's the only guarantor of a secure Jewish and democratic Israel, the only guarantor of Palestinians realizing their legitimate right to live in a state of their own, enjoying equal measures of security, freedom, opportunity, and dignity.
All right, that was Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Again, definitely conflicting messages back and forth. And, like I said, there seems to be a little bit of a chink in the armor when it comes to what the Biden administration is advocating for versus what the Netanyahu administration is advocating for. But again, who knows? I continue to make the Game of Thrones analogy. We might do an episode tomorrow and Ned Stark is dead. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up for today. I thought that was a good, hopefully, introduction into this concept of a two-state solution. We still have to talk about the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority and all of the settlements there. That also factors into the ability for this two-state solution. This week, I'm also going to talk about the Oslo Accords and then the Abraham Accords, which is what Trump set up. The Oslo Accords being the original attempt at the two-state solution, really. And so we will talk all about that. We'll talk about the Abraham Accords. All right, lastly, I'm going to leave you with this clip. It's worth listening to because, again, I feel like a storyline that is in development is the removal of Netanyahu. I really do. I think that, I don't know. Like I said before, I don't know if this has been part of the plan the entire time, if it was an opportunistic event that's happened because of, global dissatisfaction with the way he's done things. But this is a culmination of a few things I put together. I think it's worth listening to, and we will continue to call a spade a spade.
If you want to solve the problem, then you have to take in the whole truth. And you then have to admit nobody's hands are clean, that all of us are complicit to some degree. I look at this and I think back, what could I have done during my presidency to move this forward as hard as I tried? I've got the scars to prove it. But there's a part of me that's still saying, well, was there something else I could have done? That's the conversation we should be having. Not just looking backwards, but looking forward.
Now, typically when a former president comes out and says something that seems provocative or courageous, I'll be critical of them because it's like, hey, where was that courageous attitude when you were in charge? But to be fair to Obama, he actually had a notoriously frosty relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu because he was one of the few American presidents who was willing to demand that Netanyahu pump the brakes when it came to illegal settlements and when it came to any brutality toward Palestinian civilians. And he also bumped heads quite a bit with Netanyahu when he secured the Iran nuclear deal, which I'll give you more details about in just a moment. Netanyahu did not want an Iran nuclear deal. Netanyahu has always been thirsty for war with Iran. And of course, not to fight that war with just the IDF, but to pressure the United States to involve its own military in that war.
Analysts say President Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu despise each other.
There's a fundamental sense of mistrust.
Former State Department insider Aaron David Miller calls the relationship the most dysfunctional ever, each side thinking the other is ignoring their interests.
I think the president looks at Netanyahu. He doesn't feel that there's much respect for American interests. And the prime minister looks at the president and considers him bloodless and insensitive when it comes to really understanding Israeli needs.
Remember that supposed to be private exchange between the then French president and Obama in 2011. Sarkozy saying, "I cannot bear Netanyahu. He's a liar." Obama responding, "But I have to deal with him even more often than you."
But look, it wasn't just Obama who had deep issues with Netanyahu. So did Donald Trump.
You've probably heard that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi as he's called, were best buds, that it was a bromance. Well, turns out that's bull. By the end of his presidency, Donald Trump couldn't stand Netanyahu. He thought Netanyahu was disloyal and ungrateful for everything he had done for him. By the time I talked to Trump in April 2021, he was over Bibi.
I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him.
That's right. Donald Trump said, F him.
This episode was brought to you by Boost Liquid Vitamins. Wake up, take your Boost, start your day. Drink your vitamins, build your immune system with Boost. Available on Boost.com.